While it's refreshing to know that there are people like Douglas Murray and Jordan Peterson who are calling out our times as being practically the end of civilization as we knew it, anti-Christian times, they still seem a little bit too erudite and with the noses stuck in the past, and they don't have the kind of intrinsic classical bravery to point people in the direction of where we should be looking for Christian guidance, where we won't be finding from our churches due to the collapse of what we had before, which was a Christian civilization, which they are recognising. Now, anybody living in a Christian nation, say 100 years ago or more, or I don't know how many years ago, would have looked for the very first place to look would be the back of the Bible, the end of Christian society. Yeah, perversion, as is always with the end of an empire, debauchery, you know, just the normal sort of decline that you would expect. But it's given such detail and embellished so clearly. Yet what our great, you know, thinkers of our time never ever seem to have the courage to do is to stand up and make that real, make that testimony something that carries some weight, point people into a direction not of the textbooks, not of the clever calculations of how society is changing like some kind of a narrator, but somebody who's not looking in the past, not making a dialogue of what they see around them very cleverly, but somebody who can point to the future, to have some prophetic understanding. Now it just seems like they are blinded by objectivity and a sense of wanting to please and appease. They dare not quite point the finger, even though they can quite see, you know, what the finger should be pointing at. The end of Christian society. Babylon, which represents the elite, in some ways the royal family, in some ways Catholic Church, in some ways, you know, all the sort of civilizations and sort of identity groups also who'd not received a kingdom before, who suddenly have power to rule for 1 hour with the beast. They have one common purpose, it says, which fits directly, neatly into cultural Marxism and all the other identities that are being used, which Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray cleverly discuss how these are going to be used as little prongs to pull our new world order, the new identities. But what he doesn't do is point clearly to where this is being described in not only the book of Revelations, the book of Daniel, and every prophecy in the Bible regarding the end times. They will change laws and customs. They will change times and customs, celebrations and customs. They will change culture, basically. And this is a cultural war, and nobody's looking in the places that our forefathers, these very traditional thinkers, clever people in their lovely suits and jackets and highly educated people, but they just don't do it. They just don't take up the reins. They just won't do it. So no more the sound of bride and groom, no more the sound of harp. Nobody buys their goods. Come out of her. Like we're always being told about Brexit. Now this is a prophetic sign as well. Come out of her, it says, lest we share the sins of this globalization. Now this is clearly talking about a globalization in the book of Revelations. All nations have been mad on the marketing and the trade and the luxury. Yeah. Now this is talking about globalization extremely clearly, and the thing that rides the beast is a very different kind of female, which is non-reproductive, obviously, which they couldn't have foretold all the years ago when they wrote this, but they had an image in their mind. It's not the kind of female. It's one who says, "I sit as queen," like a dominant, like trans, like a feminist. I will never know morning. This represents an elite worldview, which is pulling elite strings and making all these different identity groups rule for 1 hour, and the beast is covered in blasphemous names. You can imagine what they are now, and you can almost picture it. Now, what people haven't got the capacity to do that all these great thinkers had in the past was project, think. What does it mean? Now, even when people talk in parables cleverly, like Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray, they daren't grasp that thistle. Maybe they're just not truly believers. Maybe they feel they'd be ridiculed for not being objective enough. Maybe it's just too simple. Maybe it's the elephant in the room. And they talk of the end of Christian civilization, the end of the West. And they do it quite bravely. And I have to say, well done. But take it a step further. Let people have something to understand from this. Let people know where to look. Because, okay, it's very hopeless. We can all see that. We can look into the abyss. But we need to know why this is happening in the greater scheme of things. The payback of Babylon. Okay, it's very good to type these things in. Babylon's payback. You know, I did. Look at the Gog-Magog war. Now, this was a war talked about by Bush to Chirac. I was reading this when I was 19. Gog-Magog war. The English-speaking nations of the world gathered together for battle. Gog-Magog, the giant protectors of the City of London, the trade City of London, the area of London. That's what they are symbolically. Giants, pagan, ancient giants that defend the City of London. Now, these things have a prophetic meaning. So do the Twin Towers being taken down. The Tower of Babylon, if you like. It has a resonance there. So does the woman riding the beast, with 12 stars around her head, like the European Union. It talks of come out of her, lest you share her sins. Because her sins are piled to heaven, and there's like a funeral pyre. Foaming waves it talks about in the book of Jude. And this is prophetic. It also mentions Enoch. And it also would have, in my opinion, inspired such thinking. It would have inspired, the River Tiber, foaming up, rootless people, feeding only themselves, flattering others for advantage, scoffers, black spots at your wedding feast. Now, these things are not meant to be, poured over quite so intellectually. These are like parables. These are cleverly. Jordan Peterson, I watched the other day, he talks amazingly about his biblical knowledge. But we need people to pinpoint and show exactly what this payback is meaning. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go, it says in the book of Revelations. Now has come the time to destroy those who destroy the earth, the book of Revelations. Now these things are there for us to help us understand the times that we're living in. And I think these times are clearly approaching. But then I can easily be written off. I've had a traumatic past. I suffer from post-traumatic stress. But what I found reassuring in my being overwhelmed by the diabolical nature of things that happened to me was reading and looking at things that provided clear, objective truth. And I think it's time people joined the dots and saw that what was written is clear and objective. Maybe you have greater knowledge than me. It talks also about in the Bible about condemning those who say good is bad and sweet is sour, and basically what the cultural Marxists do. Marcus, I don't know how you say it. He would talk of praising the bad and attacking the good. We've had everything going into reverse, and because we've had the great, awful, people are recognising it today, the Holocaust, we think that that's the end. Obviously, it didn't defeat the devil. It wasn't the only thing to come, and the more surreptitiously thing that people fear being dug out and rooted around, who have their clear, objective mind set on a certain pattern of human history, would not like to understand necessarily the nature of the anti-Christian times, because they would prefer to control free thought. They prefer it to be clear-cut. We can use, the Holocaust as the biggest thing that happened in history, and it was horrific. But there have been many, many, many genocides, horrific things that happened in society. We are not prepared for the coming one, because people would be too afraid of some kind of hard to see witch-like thing. They're not believers enough. We're not being governed by believers. We're being governed by people who would like to make a greater Israel when Europe falls apart. And there are continual calls every time there is chaos in Europe for people to return to Israel. This is no coincidence. This is all a set path. This is being, set up that way. The evangelicals in America putting it into practice. Now we have to be aware of the times that we're in. I can't say exactly how it'll happen and unfold. I would suggest it's more of a spiritual war at the moment with what they're doing to trans people. Change their identity is very ungodly. God made us all a certain way, and that doesn't mean we are just one-dimensional a certain way, but it certainly doesn't mean that what we are is a facade and a mask that doesn't have any reproductive meaning or purpose, and that we should all just annihilate ourselves and live nihilistically to destroy the nature of ourselves for commercial gain, so we can buy and sell the imperfections that we see in our state of not having a clear identity anymore, and make ourselves into icons, because we can worship the image of the beast, which says you can be anything, which is always the devilish thing, isn't it? You can do anything, be anything. Is letting loose the whole reins of everything, chaos coming into the world, really, with that kind of freedom. So yeah, we can be. We're all very diverse, and we've all had our links uncut. Which is kind of a Soros plan. He uses the words to sort of free up people. He wants those previous binds to disengage. Yeah, but what's the alternative? And we need an alternative. We need people pointing in the right direction as to what is actually being spoken of to be expected to happen. the worship of the image of the beast, and this image is like a communist image, the modern cultural Marxist image, which is everything trans, everything alternative, because they've not received a kingdom before and have 1 hour to rule with the beast, and it's a perverse thing that they are generating now and using to govern. So many of you out there will have your ideas spinning around the same way mine did, and you'll add to this and grow from this, but what we must do is inspire each other to look in the right places and grow in the right ways. I'll stop there. Thanks for listening.